Call meeting of the City of Plymouth to order at 6:30 on Thursday, January 9th. Please.
Councilmember Crawford. Here. Councilmember Cornish.
Here.
Vice Mayor Nunn.
Here.
Mayor Amaruso.
Here.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
And everyone stand for the pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Take a moment of silence for our President Jimmy Carter's passing and for all families down in LA, in the LA Basin that are being hit by these horrific fires. So we open it up for public comment. Oh, wait, no, sorry, gentlemen. Oopsie. Approval of City Council regular meeting agenda of January 9th, 2025.
I motion to approve the regular meeting agenda of January 9th, 2025.
Second. Roll call.
Councilmember Crawford.
Aye.
Councilmember Cornish.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Nunn.
Aye.
Mayor Amaruso.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Public comment. I will open now, and I'll start with the public. Anyone that would like to speak that has something to do with what our agenda is today, this is your time to come up and have your 3 minutes, so whatever you like. Do we have any other? Council, yes. No? Right, I'll close. We have a presentation from Mayor McLaughlin, or Vice Mayor McLaughlin, who is unfortunately in traffic right now and said he'd be here around 8 o'clock. So we're going to push that off to his arrival time and fit it in between wherever that falls, if he makes it before we finish the meeting and our closed session. And then 4.2, appoint first successors to serve on the Planning Commission. The recommendation is to appoint 4 successors to the Planning Commission.
So in the packet, it has the nominations or selections that each of you has picked, except for Councilmember Cranford, who has selected Tom Nicholson. So Mayor Amaruso has Gail Shaw, Vice Mayor Nunn, Michael Sullivan, Wendy Cranford, Tom Nicholson, and Councilmember Hornish, William Klaproth. So in order to appoint these, just needs a motion and a second and a vote. You just need to take public comment beforehand and.
I will open that for public comment. Anyone would like to speak on this matter? Do we have anything from? Okay. We have. So I do want to read in, or not read in, but take into it. I think we have 3 public comments, or we have 2 public comments on, or 1 public comment on this from citizen. Yes, citizen Stephanie Marino. So we'll put that in the record. Anyone up here have anything they want to talk about? With their appointments or your appointment?
I just want to say, I want to apologize to Tom for not making it into the packet with his appointment, but there's nothing nefarious. I just didn't make it in time.
That's timing.
Yeah, it's fine. We're good. It's all new, right? So, I'm looking for a motion.
I was gonna just say,
Oh, okay, yes.
appreciate the people that volunteered to do it, you know. It's, you know, takes a lot of their time and their lives, and thank them for volunteering, the ones that have done that.
Excellent, thank you.
I'll make a motion to approve the appointment of the 4 successors to the planning commission.
I'll second that.
Councilmember Cranford,
I,
Councilmember Cornish.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Nunn.
Aye.
Mayor Amoruso.
Alright,
Thank you, motion passes.
4.3, appoint 2 members to the Law Enforcement Contract Ad Hoc Committee. So I guess we're looking for people that wanna sit on the committee.
what did anyone turn in the paper?
No,
No, we're gonna hold off on the names, just, we're only doing this part of that whole packet. We'll come back, I think, in February. Once we have
no one has said they want to serve, so it's at the pleasure of whoever does.
Question, we have meetings with the sheriff's office scheduled before the appointment of the next council member on this. Possibly on the third or through whenever.
I met with the sheriff's office today, and so I'm waiting to hear back from them with additional information. And after that, we will schedule another meet and confirm meeting at that time.
So, do we want to just push it off till when we do all the appointments, once we get the new council member on?
Well, yeah, I had other questions on it, but if we push it off, I guess it won't matter. That's why I was just asking. I mean, when I brought this up in the last meeting, I know, and my only concern then was if there was anything pressing, I didn't want us to not have representation somewhere we needed to have it. So it wasn't just this particular thing, but if you don't think, with the timeline that we're supposedly looking at, or possibly having the 5th member on board, if you don't think that we're gonna have a negotiation with them between now, we might as well wait for that 5th person. You might have somebody who's.
Because we burn his desire to be on.
But I mean, I'm thinking if you, based on your talks, if you do think we need to move forward tonight, then, you know, either way, I just guess I'm asking you if it's necessary to do it tonight or wait.
It's hard to say when they're gonna get back to me with the information. I'm waiting on them to give me calculations on how they came up with the number that they propose that they're asking for. I know we can't match. And I've asked for how they come up with that number. And so I'm waiting for them to get back to me on how they came up with that number. And then the finance director and I will sit down and look at the calculations. And at that point, then the ad hoc committee will need to meet. And I don't know when that meeting will need to take place. Our contract with the sheriff's office ends in April. So I know that that deadline is fastly approaching. So it's hard to say if we can wait, but we're talking a month. With the absence of the ad hoc committee, I can meet with them by myself. It's always nice to have another person in the room.
Well, I can sit on that, in with you on that, if, till we get that appointed.
That would be helpful.
Or
To
unless
have-
someone else wants to do it.
To have,
I mean, I'm not-
it would be helpful to have another person in the room, I'll just say that. If it was a little difficult today, being just myself.
So, is there a council member that would be interested in sitting in that meeting?
Well, I have one other question, and this is being a new council member.
No,
Might
it's
sound
all
like
on,
a
it's
dumb
all on.
question, but thinking about this, so why exactly that we have to have an ad hoc committee to meet with the sheriff's office? And why don't they just come here? Because I'm looking at this like, we had this ad hoc committee and those 2 members are now both not on the council, so we're right in the middle of negotiations. We lost whatever work that they had done, I guess. You know, we don't, their previous negotiations there. As far as in the future, I guess I'm just asking, why does it have to be an ad hoc committee and the sheriff, we don't just agendize it and the sheriff's office come in here and just talk in open forum? And I'm just asking, I don't know why we don't do it like that.
It's certainly legally possible to do. A lot of the contracts, because you get into the weeds, it gets pretty granular, you're talking terms and conditions, there's legal input, it's just easier to have those discussions, get some of the broader deal points tentatively discussed. And then but the ad hoc can report and bring back specific issues or questions, say, hey, we're meeting with them on this issue, we're not really sure what to do, and get input from the council at any chance. So it can be a little bit of a hybrid. It just creates flexibility, especially when you're working on it at a granular level. And so it's more of a practical thing than it is a requirement.
Well, thanks for explaining that to me a little better. I would say that, I mean, if we have somebody willing to do that, work with the city manager until, because we're only looking at what, a couple weeks now, we might have somebody.
Right.
There, at that point, there may be somebody, a fifth person on board. I would say that I have a few things coming up work-wise here towards the end of the month, and the three of us have that conference also, so I don't know.
Right.
I would probably hesitate to offer to do it myself, just because they call on one of those days, like I said, have some work things going on too, so. But if one of the other members wants to do that, or if the mayor is willing to just step in till the end of the month and do that, I wouldn't have an objection.
Is there either of you interested in?
I mean, it's not that I'm against being on the ad hoc committee, but I definitely have to work
Well,
around.
no, we're not doing that, we're talking about just a step, but
Just
Yeah,
get to the
just
end of
set
the
in.
month.
Well, like you said, I mean, we have the seminar to look forward to, and I don't think we actually meet until.
The 30th.
Yeah, 30th again, yeah, so there's some time to do that, so if Peter is willing and you want to do it and work with Margaret, I think that's a terrific idea to get.
Yeah, I mean, we're only talking 21 days until the next meeting, so if they call the next 21 days, which they might not even do.
Right, which is very possible.
Yeah.
Are you interested in all of
Not right now. I don't feel I have the scope of knowledge to negotiate contracts for the sheriff's department at this point. So I think that my skill sets are used better other places better, so.
So I'd like to open this up to public comment. Is there anyone in the public that would like to speak? Seeing none, I'll close public comment. Is there anything? No? So if that's a good enough answer for the time being on that. For Kevin's day.
Do we need any kind of motion on that, or do we just?
No, that's all, it's just, yeah.
Please just sit there.
Just direction. Yes,
It's interim, so
it's direction. Okay, number 5 is consent calendar. So. Open up. Public comment, anyone that would like to speak from the public on this? Start with. Seeing none, we'll close public comment and there ain't nothing more to discuss anything, or looking for a motion to accept it as presented.
Don't we have a comment?
You should.
We received public,
Yeah, we will.
written public comment from
Oh,
Ms. Gomes
okay,
on
sorry, my bad, yep, you're
on
right,
item 5.5.
yeah, you're right.
And her concern was not being able to butcher hens. And I just wanted to point out that in 7.60.030, that certain killing is permitted, and chickens, turkeys, ducks, pigeons, geese, and domestic game birds and rabbits can be killed in a humane method in a residential area, and it lists what those are. And so that's already a permitted use within city limits.
Okay, and I also want to put Amy Gomes into record too. Yeah.
Can I comment on her comment at this time?
Sure, and if you anticipate there's gonna be discussion, or if you want, you can always pull this item separately if you want to, if you just wanna make a brief comment, that's fine.
I just wanna make a brief comment. I did read over her, I just wanted to acknowledge that I read her comment and, or went over it. And in case she's watching, I would just like to explain to her or share with her in owning hens and chickens most of my life. The butchering and culling is two different things, it's two different practices. Butchering is for human consumption, culling is when you're thinning a herd or taking care of an animal that's ill. So there's no issue with culling an animal based on what the research I found, which is what you're referencing as well. The butchering is the issue with being in the backyard and preparing in a commercial way or for our own consumption, multiple birds. So I just wanted to clarify that and say that I did read this thoroughly and understood it.
As I also did.
So. City manager actually addressed a little bit my concern. I also read through this a couple times, and the one thing that's bothered me was the butchering thing, because I got to thinking about if you can't butcher your own chicken, then every time we have a lot of deer hunters here in town, including myself. I mean, how does that play out with other animals and stuff like that? If somebody brings an animal home, and you kind of addressed some of those.
I think wild game would be a separate,
That falls under larger
Wild-
animals.
Wild game, large animals are not allowed to be butchered in city limits, at your homes.
So you're saying if somebody goes out deer hunting, they get a deer, and people have been doing this for years in this town, they bring it back to their house and in their garage and they process their own deer, that's against the city ordinance?
My understanding with that is a few years back, they changed the municipal code that was no longer an option.
That's something we're gonna have to look at in the future, because
Yeah.
there's hundreds of people doing it a year in this town, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, and I think for purpose of this item, that's probably something that you could look at separately.
Yeah.
It's a separate issue, but
Yeah, no, that's what, well, when I read that, it got me thinking about that, so it is, I agree, a separate thing, but obviously something we're gonna have to.
If I remember correctly, when we did that ordinance,
Yeah.
it was that you couldn't slaughter the animal, got it and bleed it in town. You had to do that outside the city limits. You
Well, yeah.
bring it in and cut it up.
Oh, okay, so,
That's the way I
yeah,
understood.
then
we
that's
did
what
it.
everybody does, so I was just wondering, like, if
Right.
somebody gets a deer, elk, or whatever.
Right, 'cause we have people actually slaughtering pigs.
Oh, no, I can
And let us find
understand,
out.
I can understand that, so I just meant like, you're a hunter, you kill an animal
Right,
out in the mountains or whatever, which they always got it and everything there anyways.
right.
So I thought it meant,
You
I was thinking, does this mean you
No.
can't be coming back and cutting up your own
you're
deer?
cutting your deer up.
Yeah.
Okay,
It's
so
not,
that was
bleed it
concern,
out and got it here.
after I got to reading her comment, I was thinking about that, that was one concern I had, so, all right, okay.
So looking for a motion. So, is it on?
Make a motion to approve the consent calendar.
any second,
Roll call.
Bradford,
I,
Councilmember Harnish,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Nunn,
Aye.
Mayor Russo.
No, yes.
Thank you, motion passes.
So now we're going to public hearing. 6.1. Resolution number 2025-02, adopting a negative declaration for the city's sixth cycle 2021 to 2029 housing element, and resolution number 2025-03, adopting the general plan amendment, repealing the fifth cycle Plymouth housing element, and adopting the Amador County sixth cycle 2021 to 2029 housing element of the general plan in compliance with the state housing element law. So I open the public hearing.
Good evening. Tonight, at long last, we are looking at the adoption of the sixth cycle housing element for the city of Plymouth. A housing element is a required element of the general plan, and it analyzes the housing needs and constraints. And in this, for this cycle, is analyzing the constraints within Amador County and its level 6. Each government in California is required to update the housing element periodically, and each Amador County jurisdiction must update it every 8 years. The housing element lays out the policies and goals and programs that will guide housing related actions for each of the jurisdiction and the city of Plymouth and the county. For this 6th cycle, the cities and county within Amador County decided to band together to do a county-wide housing element. Each jurisdiction in Amador County has their own annex within the housing element, so the annex contains information specific to the city of Plymouth. This period for the 6th cycle is 2021 to 2029, so we're a little past our due date. The county and each city within the housing element is required to adopt the housing element separately. The city has also prepared a draft initial study negative declaration, which evaluated potential environmental impacts associated with the housing element. Although Plymouth has not submitted their housing element to HCD yet, because we haven't adopted it, a draft was submitted to HCD previously. Changes were made to the housing element. And then I believe almost every city plus the county except for us has already submitted their adopted version to HCD. And based on comments that were made on each individual city's annex, the housing consultant then updated ours to reflect those comments so that hopefully we'll get through sooner rather than later. So all of those changes are reflected in the housing element for you. And you can see where the text is underlined or deleted within the document. That's all the changes since the original many years ago, in 2022, was submitted for public review. Public participation is a required component of the housing element, and we have had a significant amount of public participation. The draft housing element was previously released for public review from November 10th, 2022 through December 14th, 2022. The comment period was then extended to January 9th. 2 informal meetings were then held in 2022. The city of Plymouth held a joint study session with the planning commission and city council on December 12th, 2022. And the current draft was then re-noticed once again, so it was made publicly available for review from November 1st, 2024 through December 2nd, 2024, along with the companion initial study negative declaration. The housing element was posted on the city's website. We sent a notification, as well as the posting identifying the public comment period for the negative declaration was all noticed as required by state law. No comments were received during the public review period we just had. There are several required components of the housing element. There's the housing needs assessment, evaluation of past performance, housing sites inventory, community engagement, which we just discussed, constraints analysis, policies and programs, and affirmatively furthering fair housing. For the housing needs assessment, it is the plan to meet the city's existing and projected housing needs, including their regional housing needs allocation. I'll talk about a little bit more about that in a second. And we're required to include information on existing housing characteristics, overpayment towards housing, overcrowding conditions, and demographic. Prior to each housing element cycle, the county and cities within the county are given the regional housing needs allocation, and the numbers are broken up throughout the county. So the original number comes in for the county and it gets broken up by each jurisdiction. And what this means is during each cycle of the housing element, the Department of Housing and Community Development identifies the number of housing units that we are required to construct or supposed to construct within our housing element cycle. So as you can see here, with the sixth cycle, the city was assigned 7 very low, 5 low, 5 moderate, and 13 above moderate, for a total of 30 units. Within the fourth and fifth cycle, we had some units that we were required to construct, so as you can see, we had 14 very low, 14 low, 0 moderate, and we had some moderates, but those numbers do not carry over because we built so many during the fourth cycle. So with the carryover plus this cycle's allocation, we now need to construct 45 units, but all of those are at an affordability level. Now, we are not personally required to construct them, but we have to ensure that there is space available to construct them, as well as removing barriers to the construction of these units. For an evaluation of our past performance, the city is required to provide information within the housing element on how we accomplished the goals in the previous housing element, including what units did we construct during the cycle. For our housing. I think it's our housing needs assessment. It's a list of sites or housing analysis, inventory analysis. It's the list of sites where housing can be constructed, including the location, so the address or APN if it was not address, their zoning designation, the allowed density, and the realistic capacity. So within your annex, there's a list of available housing sites within the city. So those are vacant sites that are currently designated for residential uses within the general plan. These are all existing sites. Within that inventory analysis, you can see what the zoning designation, so for example, standard residential, and then it will show the density range and the anticipated number of dwelling units constructed. We don't ever anticipate full density because it's unlikely that would ever be achieved, so usually we hit it in the mid-range as the realistic capacity. And again, all of the properties listed on that housing needs, on that housing inventory assessment is existing parcels within the city that are designated for residential and are vacant. There are no sites that we've identified as needing to be rezoned. We're not proposing to upzone any properties, and we're not proposing to change the allowed densities that we currently have within the general plan and zoning. So we can achieve our RHNA numbers based on what we have in the city under existing conditions. The constraints analysis is identifying and analyzing the potential and actual governmental constraints to the maintenance, improvement, or development of housing for all income levels. It includes an evaluation of local standards, improvement standards, procedures, permitting requirements, and fees. So for example, a city could identify that their fees are a barrier to housing, or perhaps the permitting procedure for certain housing projects is also a barrier. So it needs to be identified within that constraints analysis. It also needs to include an evaluation of constraints for people with disabilities. Furthering fair housing is new for housing elements starting in 2021. And the purpose of this is to combat housing discrimination and lift barriers to foster inclusive communities. It includes protected characteristics, including persons with disabilities. So based on all of those required things that we need to evaluate, study, and provide information on, as well as ensuring that we're removing barriers to housing and furthering fair housing. The housing element then contains our plan for achieving all of those requirements from the state. So the way that we achieve those goals from the state is by including goals and policies and programs within the housing element. And because this is a countywide housing element, there are a number of goals and policies within that housing element, but there are ones that are specific to Plymouth only. So I'll go over those briefly so you can get an idea of what we will be doing once the housing element is hopefully adopted. So for program 1, it's a countywide housing group. And the purpose of this is to have coordination between the county and each of the cities to implement all of the programs that we have identified in the housing element. It's to improve access to information and resources for residents and local communities by having consistent information, information and programs available where appropriate, across all jurisdictions. And it can provide some cost savings and efficiencies, because really what the purpose is we're gonna all work together, share our resources, and have one consistent message for everyone in the county. And we've actually already started this working group, and we're helping each other out with some of the programs. For goal H1, we have housing element monitoring and annual reporting. That's required anyways. Pretty soon, you will be getting the general plan annual progress report, which is required to be done every year. And the council will be getting it, has to be done before April. So we will continue to do that. Each jurisdiction is required to maintain sites to accommodate the RENA numbers, so that means we've identified these properties. If we started taking them all away from residential uses, that means we can't meet our RENA numbers, so we can make sure we can maintain our RENA numbers within the cycle. We have a program related to accessory dwelling units, junior accessory dwelling units, and SB9 units. Staff has already begun those conversations with the planning commission. We hope to have a ordinance before the planning commission soon related to accessory dwelling units, as well as some information for SB9 units. And then program 5 is related to affordable housing land acquisition, but that's mostly good. For our goal H2, which is housing and neighborhood preservation, we have programs related to neighborhood beautification and housing rehabilitation. We have some programs related to affordable and special needs housing. Preservation of existing affordable housing, of which we don't have any right now. And then we have preserved multifamily and mobile home opportunities. We also have, again, fair housing. So to further fair housing, we have access to fair housing resources, including outreach and enforcement, housing mobility enhancement, new housing choices and affordability, place-based strategies for community preservation and revitalization, and displacement protection. We're also looking at providing affordable housing resources for renters and owners. Again, this is all countywide, so this is the importance of that countywide, the working group with the county, with the jurisdictions in the county. And then reasonable accommodation procedures for housing. We have more policies related to the federal voucher program. And then where the work really begins for staff here is under program 17, we have development code, zoning code amendments. So there are things that we will need to eventually change to our zoning ordinance related to low barrier navigation centers and emergency shelters. And that is rooted in state law, as well as transitional and supportive housing, residential care facilities, employee and farm worker housing, and application streamlining, and really those are all in state law anyway, so it's just changing our zoning ordinance to comply with state. We have some code reviews we need to do, water and wastewater infrastructure reviews, partnerships with affordable housing developers, so we will be working on that, and again, that's mostly countywide. And then the big one would be program 22, which is application processing procedures, which again is staff and looking at, does our procedures for development preclude housing or the construction for housing. There are penalties for non-compliance. We are 4 years past our deadline, so there are penalties. Should we choose to not ever adopt a housing element, we could be referred to the Attorney General by HCD. There could be significant fines. A court could limit our local land use decision-making authority. We could be subject to the builder's remedy, and we could lose out on grants or other funding, which is important. In conjunction with the housing element, the city prepared an initial study to evaluate any potential impacts associated with the housing element and determined that a negative declaration could be prepared. This negative declaration relies on the 2008 General Plan Environmental Impact Report. which identified environmental impacts related to the build out of the development potential identified within the EIR. And what that means is that in 2008, when we did our general plan and we identified all the land for commercial and residential and mixed use within the city, we had to anticipate what are the environmental impacts of that build out potential. So if everything built in 2 years, what does that look like in terms of traffic and water and sewer? So these properties are the same as what was identified in that 2008 EIR. It's within that build out potential. In accordance with the requirements of CEQA, we did circulate the negative declaration for a 30-day public review, and we posted it on the state CEQA.net web source. The negative declaration was also posted on the city's website, and we do have a page for the housing. Anyone requesting notification of notices and all state agencies which require notification of the CEQA document were also properly noticed. It was available for review again for 30 days, and during that 30-day period, we received one comment letter, and that was from Caltrans. And within that Caltrans letter, it was basically asking us to follow procedures that we follow anyways. So any project that comes in that has any potential impacts on Highway 49, we notify Caltrans right away. They're one of our notifying agencies when a project first comes in anyways of a significant project, or if there was a minor project where we thought we would have some impact. We also notify them as our first initial round of review, so they have a chance to review from the beginning stages of the project. So all of those things that they are requesting are things we follow anyways. A response isn't required under CEQA, a written response for negative declarations. So we did not prepare a formal written response, but we acknowledge that we will follow all the things. The planning commission then held a public hearing, and no comments were received prior to or at the public hearing, and adopted a resolution recommending city council approval of the negative declaration. Since the completion, or since the planning commission meeting and after the city council review was noticed, and then the agenda went out, we did receive a comment from Ms. Moreno, and she has comment on the negative declaration. And we have a response that I will read very verbatim. I'm very sorry. This is gonna be long. And you do have the letter, and staff and city attorney will follow it. Although CEQA does not require written responses to comments on a negative declaration or responses to late comments, the city has considered the letter submitted by Ms. Moreno on January 9th. And is responding to the letter as follows. The commenter states that the 2008 EIR is outdated and does not reflect current environmental baselines. Since 2008, there have been significant changes, including but not limited to the addition of 99 units at Zinfandel Ridge. By relying on the 2008 EIR, the city has failed to meet CEQA's requirements for a thorough, accurate, and timely environmental review. Our response is that the commenter does not provide substantial evidence that the negative declaration for the countywide 6 cycle housing elements does not reflect an accurate environmental baseline. Therefore, no further response is provided. The commenter states that the staff report cites conformance with the 2008-2025 general plan element. The commenter alleges that the circulation, conservation, open space, noise, and safety elements of the general plan are outdated and therefore do not contain appropriate policies or mitigations for the purpose of the 2025 environmental analysis. Our response is that the commenter does not raise any significant environmental issue with the negative declaration for the county's countywide 6 cycle housing element, therefore no further responses. The commenter alleges that the environmental document acknowledges potential impacts to city infrastructure as a result of infill development, but does not propose mitigations. The comment further states that if housing is determined to be affordable, there would be no mitigation for street improvements needed in the new housing areas, which would create an unmitigated burden on existing residents. Our response is, since infrastructure is not one of the environmental factors analyzed in the negative declaration, it is unclear which impact area the commenter is suggesting needs mitigation measures. In addition, the negative declaration concludes that all impacts are less than significant and less than significant impacts do not require mitigation under CEQA. Therefore, there is no significant environmental issue raised by this comment and no further response is provided. The commenter states that given the projected increase of 45 units of housing, which allegedly represent 10% of current housing stock, it is inappropriate to indicate that such a significant increase in housing within the city limits will have no significant environmental impacts on infrastructure, water supply, wastewater capacity, stormwater drainage, circulation and traffic, and increased wildfire risk. Our response is that the commenter does not provide substantial evidence of any potentially significant impact on the environment as a result of the proposed project. Therefore, there is no significant environmental issue raised by this comment and no further response is provided. The commenter states that the CEQA guidelines section 15130 requires a discussion of cumulative impacts when a project's incremental effect is cumulatively considerable. The comment further states that the housing element does not analyze the cumulative impacts of development in conjunction with other past, present, or reasonably foreseeable projects, including the Zinfandel Ridge project, the Acorn Ridge Casino, and Greeley Ranch. The commenter alleges that this omission undermines the integrity of the environmental review and fails to inform the public and decision makers about the broader consequences of the housing element. Our response is that the commentator cites State CEQA guidelines section 15130, which requires a cumulative impact analysis in environmental impact reports. The negative declaration was prepared for this project, so section 15130 does not apply. Nonetheless, cumulative impacts are analyzed in the negative declaration on page 64. The commentator states that under CEQA guidelines, section 15088.5, significant new information or changed circumstances necessitate a supplemental or new EIR. The commentator states that changes in regional water supply, traffic patterns, and wildfire risk must be considered in the absence of this analysis to deprive the public of the opportunity to understand and comment on the true environmental consequences of the project. Our response is that pursuant to state CEQA guidelines section 15088.5, the lead agency is required to recirculate an EIR when significant new information is added to the EIR after public notice is given on the availability of the draft EIR for public review, but before certification. A negative declaration rather than an EIR has been prepared for this project, so section 15088.5 does not apply. In addition, the commentator does not identify any new information that has been added to the negative declaration after it was released for public review. As a result, there is no significant environmental issue raised by this comment. So based on that. Should you decide to adopt today, there are some steps that staff still needs to follow. Following its adoption, staff will need to transmit the housing element to HCD for formal review and certification. HCD will certify or could request additional modifications that would be done at staff level unless something significant were to occur, which I do not anticipate because HCD has looked at it in a draft form. They've also looked at every other cities and we're in there with them. And based on comments received for the other cities, our housing element has been adjusted to address those comments. And then once certified, staff will begin working on programs identified in the housing element. So tonight, there's two resolutions before you. Staff is recommending that you adopt resolution 2025-2, approving the 6th cycle housing element initial study negative declaration, and adopt resolution 2025-3, approving the general plan amendment to repeal the 5th cycle housing element and replace with the 2021 to 2029 6th cycle housing. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
So I guess I'll start with, I usually go to public comment first, but is there any questions from council members? So this is kind of a, we're gonna flip it around a little bit.
Yeah, I have questions.
Okay.
And I'm gonna just ask for some patience because, wow, this is a lot. So, my understanding is by having a negative declaration, you're essentially saying CEQA, we don't have to have CEQA, correct?
No,
Okay.
it's that we have performed an initial study under CEQA to determine. So before any environmental review is undertaken, or as part of the environmental review, before we undertake a document, we perform what's called an initial study, and that's to check to see, based on what I'm looking at, is there the potential for a project to have significant impacts on the environment? So, for example, as Infidel Ridge, when that initial study was undertaken, you can see we have this big land mass. For example, what animals are out there? Are there any protected animals? We're gonna dig up this land and grade and build roads and build houses. Is there potential that we might disturb a burrowing owl? So you would say a potential impact. Same with, yeah, so same with all the other sections. Is there the potential that when we're grading this land, because this is Zinfandel is a project. Is there the potential that while we are grading, could we impact a cultural resource? So within that initial study, you are identifying what is the project and what is the potential. So Zinfandel Ridge was a big project, many homes, we have significant grading, you have roads, you have houses, you have infrastructure. And within that initial study, the city determined that an EIR, in this case, an environmental impact report, is the appropriate method to identify the environmental impacts of that project, because there was the likelihood that there could be some impacts that we couldn't mitigate to a less than significant level. When you have an impact that you can't mitigate to a less than significant impact, that's an EIR, and the council must adopt a statement of overriding considerations. For this project, when we did the initial study, I have land that's already designated for housing. Anyone could build housing on that starting today without the housing element. And so does this housing element change anything within the city that is going to create an environmental impact? So for example, if I change the density of if I change standard residential's density to the max was 12 units per acre, that is an impact on the city. I have just increased the density of the city. There is the potential for traffic at a minimum, right? So if I was doing something like that, that would identify this is a significant and could be significant. But in this case, when looking at everything, when looking at the fact that all the sites are identified within our general plan, they could be built tomorrow. The project is just the housing element. It's not the actual construction on those properties. What I do want to point out is that when any project comes into the city, even if they're identified in that EIR, we have to evaluate it under CEQA for every project, every time. So
That
that's
was gonna be my second question.
Yeah.
Yeah, so adopting this doesn't give a blanket anything.
Yeah.
You still have to go through the processes that are required by the state.
Yes, for any project that comes before staff, and then especially before the planning commission and the city council, you are always making a finding based on CEQA. So if I brought you Greenwich Ranch tomorrow, a residential development, I said, just to prove it, you would say, Erica, how am I gonna make the findings that we perform CEQA adequately? And you would be correct, because you couldn't make the findings, right?
Right.
So that is why,
That's why
in this case, we picked the negative declaration, because we did not identify any significant environmental impacts as a result of the housing element and the policies of the
Thank you.
So one question I have is to understand, why is it that we're 4 years behind on doing what was significant? As a new member, I was trying to figure out, how do we not get in a situation like this again? So what was it that took us 4 years?
That's a very difficult question. I think Part of the problem was we thought the countywide housing element would be easier. It was a little difficult. We had a little bit of difficulties with the housing consultant. We started a little late, because we were trying to use, funds so that the cities didn't have to pay, out of the general fund for the housing element. And the single work took us a while, so we started a little bit late, had some trouble, and then the sequel work took a little while. We also had some staff turnover, that I think, kind of slowed us down a little, because you had several different planners before me that kind of rotated in and out. I think it was just a confluence of factors that kind of led to us being this late. Hopefully we will never do this.
You mentioned barriers. What kind of barriers are we up against?
So, it varies from city to city, but barriers to housing could include, and we have an item, that's your next item, that is a barrier that we've already identified, so we'll talk about zoning as a barrier. But a barrier could be anything. If I have an affordable housing project come in that wants to build units, and I tell them that their planning application fee is $100,000, that's a barrier. Now, a planning application fee is $100,000, but some cities it's quite high. If I make the process too difficult, that is a barrier. If I don't have information and resources available, that is a barrier. But we need proper development standards. There's also, new state laws in terms of how we properly, or how we need to process 100% affordable housing projects. And we need to have information and resources available for those, so that an applicant could easily find it and use it. Other barriers are the zoning ordinance. If the zoning ordinance isn't consistent with state law, or we have barriers in there that prohibit, let's say, emergency shelters. Or if I just have a lack of information on my website, such as what do I as a developer need to give to the city in order to have a complete application? So if I didn't have that information, that's a significant barrier as well, because we're just gonna start going round and round and round on what we can determine to staff.
Okay, thank you for that. These possible sites, are they already called out, or is this just in general terms within the city limits?
So any site identified has to be within the city limits, otherwise we can't include it. And as I mentioned, there is an Excel spreadsheet within the Plymouth Annex that lists all those sites, and those are existing. We were very lucky, those are existing sites, I didn't have to rezone it. So we went through the general plan to identify which sites are designated for residential development, and of those, which are vacant. So Zinfandel is approved, there's still phase 4, I can identify those number of units. Greenwich is a project under review, but it's not approved, so I can't count those units as a specific number, but I can anticipate the development potential that it can occur, but that's based on the general plan, land use designation. So these are all existing sites, and we're just pulling the information from our general plan and then putting it in a spreadsheet.
Okay, thank you for that. I know that something was called out where Zinfandel Ridge was not around in 2008 when the first EIR was done, but because with any project that is a new EIR being furnished, is it safe to assume then that the Zen Ridge EIR was applicable or considered in this new 6th cycle?
So the Zinfandel Ridge has their own EIR to address project-specific impacts of the Zinfandel Ridge project. The general plan EIR is what we call programmatic EIR, and that establishes the baseline for development within the city. So when Zinfandel Ridge came through, and this would be for any project that we have under this general plan, when Zinfandel Ridge comes through, they have to identify the baseline plus their project. The baseline plus project conditions is what's in the city, but what also have we anticipated within the city, and that goes back to the build out potential in the general plan. Because what we don't want is every time project comes through, so let's say Greelage comes through and they're only studying their impacts. Well, if I just look at Greelage in a bubble. But if all these other sites start developing, there's a mass cumulative impact that starts happening. So no EIR is in a bubble, it has to look at what is going on inside the entire city plus my project.
All it comes in. Yeah, okay, thank you for all those answers.
And I'd like to add to that, that project was already in process, so it was already a known entity. And they had already kind of figured out the unit number. So when that was done, it was already kind of figured in there, and there were several other projects that were all on the table at the same time, Cottage Knoll, right out, just out here, just outside there on the right. The Greelage project, those were already all, at the time that was done, those were already kind of known entities. But then the recession killed everything, and they all kind of went away, except for Reader.
Yeah.
Reader stayed,
Yeah, Bill.
plugging through, so.
This 2008 was when the market flopped.
Right. So that was, that's just my historical knowledge, because being on council back.
So, yeah, so
Good stuff.
taking Greelage as an example, cause
Right.
we are working on the EIR right now, cause they are still technically a project.
Right.
That EIR looks at what are the project specific conditions, so if I grade what animals might have harm, if I grade, could I impact a cultural resource? But then it looks at where cumulative becomes more impactful is traffic conditions, so we're looking at what's existing in the city.
Yeah.
What's existing in the city plus what is the build out potential plus now Greelage added on. So if everything builds, what would the city look like?
Right.
What could the impact be? If all these projects come online, what if we had to widen a road? It's partially the responsibility of Greelage, right, plus all these other projects. So you have to identify it and associate the direct impact of that project so that they can pay their fair share for it.
That helps. That's just, sometimes with historic knowledge, just to put out there, to put with the, legalese. So, all right, so everyone, any other questions potential? Then I'd like to also enter into public comment, Ms. Stephanie Marino, resident. Her, although you kind of already did it, but I'm gonna just make sure that it's in her public comment. I'm gonna open that for public comment on the floor. Seeing that, is there any other correspondence? No? All right, I'll close public comment and I guess we just need to do a resolution. Or a motion for a resolution. Or. So are we lumping these together, 6-1 and 6-2? That, or we did?
Separate.
They're separate, right?
They're separate.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm looking for. Resolution number 2025-0261.
There's two resolutions, one is the resolution. There's two,
You want to open it for both resolutions?
you can do one at a time or both.
Okay, 'cause I'm doing time, but I
I
can
would
do.
do, I would do one at a time, I would do 2025-02 first, which
Right.
is the negative declaration.
Yeah, I already read that one out.
I don't wanna speak on behalf of my other council members, but for myself, I know I'm hesitating in adopting it because. It's a lot to understand. And there's a uncertainty maybe of. I guess there's an uneasiness and is adopting something like this gonna affect us for future projects where we have. Bites us in the rear basically, comes back later and goes, oh, well, we adopted this thing and this housing element now. We're getting projects or things are happening that we don't want because we've adopted it. That's where my head's at, so I just wanna be incredibly clear, by adopting this resolution. This does not put us in a position where if a future project comes in or a current project that's underway, such as Greeley, Acorn Ridge, any of these others. Require some sort of CEQA, EIR, accepting a negative debt does not. Null and void that.
If I may.
Yes.
The housing element is a requirement of the state, we are required to adopt it.
Okay.
Number one. Number two, as I mentioned before, that negative deck, neither the 2008 EIR nor this negative declaration excludes any project from CEQA. They are still required to, based on the requirements of CEQA plus staff's interpretation, or let's say anticipated impacts of a site, are required to perform review under CEQA. An example would be sites under 5 acres are exempt from CEQA for infill development, but let's say a commercial project wanted to come in and they had massive amounts of hazardous chemicals, staff would say, no, we're not gonna exempt it for the reasons where we don't have to exempt you under CEQA. We're gonna perform a full CEQA. So any project that comes forward, even if we didn't adopt this, even if we do adopt this, from now until, if they ever change CEQA, we are required to evaluate it under CEQA. Greeley doesn't get a pass, nobody gets a pass.
Okay. I'll make a motion to adopt the negative declaration for the city's 6th cycle housing element.
I'll second.
Councilmember Crawford,
Aye.
Councilmember Hornish,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Nunn,
Aye.
Mayor Amoruso.
Aye.
Thank you, motion passes.
So now we'll move on to 6.2, waive the first reading.
No. So now that was just the environmental document.
Okay,
Now you have,
Now you're doing the housing element.
now you have to actually adopt, or now we're on the resolution regarding.
oh, they're lumped in, they're all in the same header.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but there's two separate
Oh, I
resolutions.
didn't say it all.
Okay,
No, you said it, you adopted the first resolution, but there's two resolutions.
oh, yes, so
Oh, no,
number-
I see.
2503 amendment.
You're right, we're good. So number 2503-03, adopting the general plan amendment, repealing the 5th cycle Plymouth housing element, adopting the Amador County wide 6th cycle, 2021 to 2029 housing element of the general plan in compliance with the state housing element law. So, do I need to open that for public comment?
No, you.
No, that's all part of-
It's all part of it.
It's all part of it,
It's
just doing it two separate
resolutions.
votes. Okay,
Someone else can do that.
thank you.
2025-03, adopting the general plan amendment, repealing the 5th cycle Plymouth housing element and adopting the Amador Countywide 6th cycle housing element of the general plan in compliance with state housing element law.
I second.
Roll call, please.
Councilmember Crawford,
Aye.
Councilmember Hornish,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Nunn,
Aye.
Mayor Amoruso.
Aye.
Thank you, motion passes.
Thank you very much. Sorry for that confusion. That's a little complicated. So now we're gonna move on to 6.2, waive the first reading by title only and introduce an ordinance amending chapter 19.56 residential and agricultural districts to include a new multifamily zoning designation and minor amendments to comply with state law. Erica's, you have anything on this?
Yes, it's me. So staff tonight is bringing forward proposed amendments to the zoning ordinance related to adding a new multifamily designation and then additional modifications related to state law. To give you a little bit of background, staff is proposing a modification to include a residential zoning designation to allow specific multifamily development in an easier fashion. There are several inconsistencies with the state law with the existing use list that we have, so we're gonna hopefully clean that up. The planning commission reviewed the draft modifications on August 15th during a study session. And then on October 17th, the planning commission adopted a resolution recommending city council approval of the amendments. In the city of Plymouth, we have 3 standard residential zoning districts, and that is rural residential, which has a density range of 0.6 to 2.28 dwelling units per acre. We have standard residential, which is most most of our land within the city, which is 4.0 to 4.8 dwelling units per acre. And we have village residential, which allows mixed use residential and commercial developments with 8 to 16 dwelling units per acre, and it's designated to be near the city's downtown area. We also have a high density residential overlay, and that was created in 2014 to address what was identified in the city's fifth cycle housing element. The requirements for this overlay zoning district make it very difficult. We only have one property that's designated for this. And since that amendment in 2014, new properties have applied to rezone their property to the overlay zoning district. This staff sees this as a barrier to multifamily, just the requirements of that overlay district makes it a little difficult. And so this is one of our meeting our housing element requirements before the housing element is adopted kind of initiatives. And so in order to meet the needs of residents and to encourage multifamily to support an additional housing type within the city, we've created a new zoning designation. So what that would mean is that we would add a multifamily zoning district to chapter 19.56. The designation would require a minimum of 16 dwelling units per acre and a maximum of 20 units per dwelling, 21 units per acre, and that's the same as the existing overlay. What's different from the overlay is where the overlay gets applied to, let's say, the standard residential zoning designation. There's a little bit of conflict between a high density overlay and a standard residential based zoning district, is that we have created a list of permitted and conditionally permitted uses specific to this category that requires the development of multifamily. So in the future, if we ever needed to upzone as part of a housing element, we do have this in place. But what it's trying to achieve is requiring multifamily in a multifamily zoning district and prohibiting uses that would be inconsistent with a multifamily structure. And again, this zoning designation is consistent with the general plan land use designation of high density residential, so it's something we already have in our general plan. I'm not proposing to rezone any sites tonight to medium density residential, but we have it to reduce a step where someone would put on that overlay with some conflicting standards to make it easier if someone did want to rezone their property to multifamily to allow for multifamily. Again, any project that comes in, we're gonna evaluate for CEQA and we're gonna evaluate their project, what it is they want. While I was looking at the zoning ordinance for multifamily, I figured that we should clear up some of the inconsistencies with state law so that it is compliant with state law. So within that use list, we have updates to a number of things. So for example, mobile homes are currently noted as only being allowed with the administrative use permit or conditional use permit. And state law requires us to treat these as permitted use, same as a single family residence. The use type family daycare has been added to the list. State law requires cities to allow family daycare homes with up to 14 children as a permitted use. So that's a requirement of state law, that's in their requirement. Not required by state law, but we have added child or adult daycare more than 15 to the use list. The current list only allows for facilities up to 14 people with administrative conditional use permit. But staff would like to allow for an increase in that. Larger facilities should be considered to meet the needs of the existing residents and growing demands for adult care. So something that would fall under this, it could be adult services, adult care. And by limiting it to less than 15, it significantly impacts the services that could be provided to residents within the city. And could, limit some assistance for residents that we have, and we'd like to expand that. Now, again, We're proposing to add this use as a conditional use permit, so that larger facility would still be being reviewed by the planning commission during a public hearing. And staff would obviously, well, staff and the planning commission would evaluate what's the potential impact of this type of facility. But we would like to have consideration for larger facilities. As the population grows and gets older, we see an increase. Religious assemblies, there were some minor modifications to be consistent with state law. Outdoor gatherings under agricultural, we currently have it as approved, but we've changed it. A significant outdoor gathering, such as a big concert, would currently be allowed under the code by right, and those can have a significant impact, so we've changed it to requiring review by the city. We've changed ADUs to be consistent with state law, and then eventually we will have a new ordinance in the zoning ordinance related to ADUs. And then there was another section in there requiring review for solar power installation, and I believe that meant solar panels, and we cannot require a review of that, so we've taken that off the list. So staff is recommending that you waive the first reading and adopt an ordinance amending chapter 19.56. All of those amendments are within chapter 19.56 as discussed by staff and in the staff report. And that concludes my presentation, and if you have any questions on this, I'd be happy to answer.
And just to clarify for the record, you're waiving the first reading and introducing the ordinance.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Hi. Question about village residential.
Yes. Oh,
Can you
gosh.
give me an example
What do you mean?
of where or what that looks like, or do we have, you said there's only one example?
Oh, village residential,
Yeah.
so
So,
the overlay, we only have one.
okay,
The village residential, we do have a few parcels located around the downtown that are designated for village residential, and then one. I don't understand why, but nowhere near the downtown, but there is another one further down, Highway 49, nowhere near. The downtown.
and then what does multifamily mean as far as size of people? And where can they currently go?
So, we can't, regulate number of people within a residence.
Okay.
Right now, where could multifamily go? It could go within the village residential, which is supposed to be in a specific area, right, around the downtown. You could be located within the overlay zoning district, but we only have the one. And so if I was a person, I don't know, on Pacific and I wanna build some townhouses, the standard residential does not allow me to do so. You have to change this. The problem with that overlay is the size requirements, and based on the number of lots, becomes very difficult for many parcels within the city to actually be rezoned, or have that overlay rezone applied to them.
Okay, and then lastly, what is the meaning for, on this table here, P uses allowed by right? What does by right refer to?
Oh, so by right, so it means that you are a permitted use. Your use is permitted, you don't have to ask me if you can have a single family residential use in a single family residential zone district.
Thank you very much.
So this, okay, lost me a little bit with the list of items. Like the large gathering and then et cetera. Yeah, so
Sorry.
don't get in the way of our the open space. But so on this specific agenda item, it says include a new multifamily zoning designation and minor amendments.
Yes.
I think some of the things in that list, I may not consider minor amendments. And that's what I'm guessing you're referring to, that list is the minor amendments.
So minor amendments, they're minor in the fact that I have to allow it now. For the most part, ADUs, that falls under state law.
Right,
Religious assemblies, I have to follow federal.
right,
You could not change it and I still have to follow it and we just
Right.
have an inconsistent code. It's just trying to make it easier for everyone.
the two that stuck out to me was the large gatherings,
Mhm.
and then the second one that stuck out to me was the do you have the list again? There was
Well,
two.
the adult daycare.
That,
Those are still considered minor amendments. A significant amendment is the fact that we are adding a multifamily zoning district. That's significant change to the city, right? We have a new zoning designation coming to you. Those other little tweaks and tweaks are just minor in relation to the bulk of what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is increase the potential that multifamily could at some point be built in the city. And multifamily, there's a variety of things that count as multifamily. It could be condos, it could be little townhouses, it could be a triplex, it could be a fourplex. There's many things that could fall under that multifamily zone classification. The other things are,
and
well,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah, the other things are, while we are here, we know we have inconsistencies with state law, and there's a few minor tweaks that
So essentially, we have to have a multi-family
we do not.
zone
Well, you don't technically have
by
to have
state.
one,
Well, that's what it
but-
says right here.
so you do not technically have to have a multifamily zoning designation. But we have to remove the barriers to the production of multifamily. And staff has identified that the way that the zoning ordinance is set up right now, that there is a barrier. Because the overlay, which does allow multifamily, is difficult to apply to many properties. And the village residential is specific in that it says it is for properties only around the downtown. There is land elsewhere in the city where multifamily could be. Now, anyone wanting to rezone their property, that rezone comes before you, right? So it's not someone says tomorrow, I have a property at 9130 Main Street and I wanna make it multifamily, so I'm gonna start building some townhouses. Doesn't work. They still have to go through the process. This is just for moving an initial step to hopefully remove a barrier where we can have additional housing types. Thank you.
My question is, and what your first one was, how often have we had major concerts in the city? And how does that impact us? I mean, the fairgrounds are out of our league.
They're out.
Because that's a state-owned property, and they can do whatever they want.
There was, when I looked at it, I was surprised that we didn't require a review, and I'm gonna tell you why. Because anytime you have an event, you have the potential for traffic impacts on the city. So if I have, and there's only, Sutter Mall is, I believe, the only zone to act, so. There's. What you don't wanna do is then be reactionary if a problem occurs, we try to do it in anticipation, and in my experience, allowing. With no limit, an event of any size without city review or purview. Is problematic, so what if I decide to start hosting weddings and the city doesn't know about it, and I'm hosting weddings every other weekend, traffic. You have impacts on sewer and water, we would like to know so that if impacts could occur. What if I have 500 cars driving down a gravel road, kicking up dust, bothering the neighbors? What if I'm taking all that gravel onto the road and it lands in my storm drain? That's what we're trying to avoid. Now, have I heard of any problems? No, and you could strike it from the change. It's not,
I'm not necessarily concerned, I just wanted more, a
yeah,
little more detailed
If
description
that's-
of. If this has been a problem, which I can't ever remember being a problem, but if it's, if it's necessary, it's.
And to piggyback on that, something I caught, you're saying this particular large gathering stated only for agricultural
Yes.
zone properties
I believe we only have 5 parcels zoned for it.
in the
But
city limits.
they're large, so the potential that someone could start hosting a wedding is a concern, when I saw it, I was quite surprised that we didn't require a review, to be honest with you, because in other jurisdictions and in my experience, the things that people will do is quite extensive and the problems that that
That
occur
arise.
from larger events without city review can be very difficult to this.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily
Yeah.
against it, I want clarification.
But no, I've never had a complaint, those 5 parcels are owned by Sutter Home right now, but I do believe they wanna sell, and so there's the potential that there are new owners that come.
Thank you.
Point taken. All right, so at this point, I'm gonna open up to public comment. Sir,
And open the public hearing.
oh, sorry, yes, and I've got to open this public hearing.
Last name for the record, MUSC and Jacob. I have a question for everyone. Does the rezoning?
On your mic. Thank you.
Jacob Muscat, MUSCN, is my last name. Does the rezoning change the taxes, the property taxes, the assessments on the properties are assessed? That's all.
So, if you were to rezone your property, I do believe will have a higher tax base, but it's not until you develop the property.
Right.
You have the potential, but then obviously once you develop, your taxes will go up, but I'm not rezoning it, so no one's impacted by this. But should someone choose to upzone their property, there's a potential for it.
But that would
You use
exist
the brand.
regardless.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
This item has nothing to do.
right.
Mike's Meta Hockey. And I was just wondering if when you said the senior care, that's something like the Gold Course and it has long-term living, is that what you're describing?
Yeah, so the state requires us to allow child, we call community care facilities up to a certain level, and we are required to allow those by right. So that means that assisted living, a certain number of people can occupy within a residential dwelling by right, they don't come to staff unless they were building a new building or they needed to make improvements to the interior, that would require a building permit, but we're not reviewing these.
Okay.
But what we found is that it's expensive to operate these facilities, and so they tend to want to have more people to make it work. And also the demand is so high, so that's why we're proposing to allow for an increase, but again, it's a conditional use permit for you guys.
And then the dumb question, does that bring in any money to the city at all?
I
For
don't,
them renting the rooms or?
I mean, negligible.
I don't believe it does, and you would have jobs, but
Sure, John.
minimal jobs.
Okay, thank you.
Any other public comment? Anyone? No. Council members, any other council questions? All right, so at this point, I'm looking for to waive the first reading.
Close the public hearing.
I'm sorry, well, that happened after the. Right. Okay, go ahead.
In the case, I'll look at the first one to make a motion to approve item agenda number 6.2, waive the first reading.
I would just have you, just so we have a clear record, can you just, under state law, if you don't, you have to read the title, so that way you don't read the whole ordinance.
Sure.
So, if you go to the recommendation on the,
Waive the first reading by title and introduce the ordinance.
yeah, that one.
Okay, I'll make a motion to approve the agenda item 6.2, waiving the first reading by title and introduce the ordinance.
Of the city, can't read the whole thing. On the last page of the staff report, sorry,
Under
under recommendation,
recommendation.
under recommendation.
You want me to do it, Laura?
Yeah, go for it.
I motion to approve waiving the first reading by title only and introducing ordinance amending chapter 19.56 residential and agricultural districts to include a new multifamily zoning designation and minor amendments to comply with state law.
Councilmember Crawford.
Aye.
Councilmember Cornish.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Nunn.
Aye.
Mayor Amoruso.
Aye.
Thank you, motion passes.
Thank you very much. Moving on, we're gonna go to 7.1. Discuss Plymouth Municipal Chapter 8.02 burn permits and potentially provide direction to staff on changes to the code. Margaret?
Yes, at the last council meeting, Vice Mayor Nunn requested that the burn permits come back to the council at this meeting, and in the packet is the history of the burn permits since 1960 something. And
They hear
the last change to the ordinances was done last year to modify the distance. And the most current version of the municipal code is Exhibit A in your packet for discussion for tonight. And Ashley Anaya, Fire Prevention Officer for Amador Fire District, is here for any questions you may have from them on their point of view on the municipal code. And I will turn it over to the council since they requested the item be brought to for discussion.
So I believe it was two separate issues we were talking about discussing. One was the repealing the 20-foot clearance back to 10 feet, the state standard. And then the necessity to have a permit at all was gonna be a separate discussion point. It was like two separate things we wanted to discuss. With my intention.
You could discuss both issues.
Yeah,
Sutter Creek is the only, you mentioned that Sutter Creek doesn't have a permit.
Sutter Creek and Elmore City. I don't believe Elmore City does either.
Right, they're both serviced from Sutter Creek Fire, correct?
Great.
They're the only jurisdictions within the county that don't have a permit process. And Ashley can speak more to that. She did the research on that.
and just to provide a framework for you, I know that, we're all still learning. This is an item that's just for discussion. To maybe discuss, hey, what are some one or two or three things we want to change about the ordinance? Give direction, and then if she gets that direction, she'll come back with another ordinance. So feel free to, anything's fair game.
Okay. Yeah, so I was basically gonna say is, it seems like there should be two separate discussions or topics. If we could just address one, then maybe move to the other one, might be a little easier. The first one I would want to address personally is the 20-foot that was added back in, I believe, August. So extending it out to 20 feet, removing that from the current and moving it back to the 10-foot. That was a state standard. 10 foot of clearance.
That's fine, I think let's
I
have,
was gonna say, I would love to hear from Ashley.
have Ashley come up, please.
Good evening, council. Ashley Anaya, Fire Prevention Officer for Amador Fire. We don't disagree with you, Vice Mayor. 10 feet is the state standard. One of the former council members was really insistent on that 20-foot. It's extra defensible space. Disagree with that, but state standard is 10 feet. I don't disagree with you there. As far as do you want me to talk on both topics right now?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. As far as requiring a burn permit, it is, aside from Sutter Creek and Amador City, a county standard requirement is some sort of burn permit. In the unincorporated areas of the county, it falls under CAL FIRE's purview, they have to get their burn permit. And then Jackson and Ione both have their own separate burn permits, Ione being the most stringent. I can go into depth if you would like.
And I would say in the past, I think when we've had this before, right, when we had the permits, we never charged for the permit, it was just you had to come in.
We do
So-
charge
Did we charge?
$6.
$6.
Oh, I thought the past it was just come and fill out the paperwork. Okay, my bad.
Can I ask the reason for the permits? Is it so that you guys are aware who's doing what when? Yeah.
So that's a great question. The permits are twofold. One, it gives us the opportunity to educate the public on safe burning practices when they come to get the permit. And then it also notifies our line personnel that there is going to be a burn pile happening within the city limits. And those, I do believe, are housed at the fire station as well, so they're directly notified.
Thank you.
So in general, most cities, most jurisdictions, having the permit, you don't actually have to call in every time you go set up the file. So you still wouldn't necessarily know, and there might be some jurisdictions where you do. I don't know if you've done research on that, but like, you get the ones from CAL FIRE, say, or some of the other jurisdictions. You have the permit so that the people, like I think CAL FIRE basically requires it, just what you're saying, just so that people read the rules and know the rules. But you don't actually have to call them to say you're burning, the only way you're burning is to see the smoke, so. That was the one point that I had, and then the other problem I had with our situation here is that people have to come down to the city to get the permit. We don't have anything in place to make it like online, I don't believe we have it set up to do online.
I'm working with our IT company to set it up online so that it's available to do online and even be available to do on the weekends and the fire department be notified.
So, yeah, if we had something like that, that would be great. I know in the city of Jackson, they have it set up, you can do it online. Placerville, they're under El Dorado County Fire. El Dorado County Fire doesn't charge for burn permit. You just go online, just like Jackson, you go online, you do it. And you have the permit. If they show up, somebody calls, it lists all the requirements. I think we don't have any of that in place and we require this permit. And like, I even looked at Amador Fires because, if you read through ours, it talks about the fire chief, in there, issuing these permits and stuff. There's not even any links on Amador Fires page for a burn permit for the city of Plymouth or any other regulations for burning in Plymouth.
Yeah, and I can absolutely look, I can't speak to our website, I don't manage that. We can definitely look into adding a link to the Plymouth City page. Currently it's run through the city of Plymouth. We don't regulate burn permits in the rest of our jurisdiction due to it being SRA.
That's right.
But I don't see why we couldn't get a link to your guys' page, especially if it's online.
Yeah, so I guess one problem I have, why I feel this is rather urgent, is with the changes that were made. It's pretty impossible for anybody to burn in town now, the people who do want to burn and clean up their properties. And one of the biggest things we push all the time is fuel mitigation, cleaning people's properties. Well, the system is currently in place, makes it pretty impossible for the residents here to be able to clean their properties and burn. And so I think personally, I would like to see us just suspend this temporary, even if it's temporary, until we have something in place that actually works for people. Because here it's already middle of January and people haven't been able to clean the property. Something that, we could come back and look at. I mean, I would like to, and I think the fire department sounds like it would be in agreement that 10 feet is the state standard and CAL FIRE, everybody up to 10 feet. I think we could all agree that we could go back to the 10 feet probably, but as far as the whole permit process, I just feel like we're requiring something which we don't really have anything in place. And a lot of people can't get down here to City Hall during the day, during the week, the 4 days, that the City Hall is open to get a permit. So it's kind of like, we need to do something now for people.
I actually, agree, I was shocked to hear it was changed to 20 feet. First, let me say, I'm willing to bet that there's several residents in the city of Plymouth that just aren't bothering getting a burn permit in the first place. They're just burning their stuff when they need to burn it. So, I frankly think it's just a little bit of a red tape thing that probably is unnecessary to have. I did check with Tracy to see how many burn permits are requested on a monthly basis. She said sometimes not even one. Well, I know there's more than one person burning in town, so. You know. I don't see the need for a permit, and I certainly don't see the need for 20 feet clearance for a lot of properties. That would make it impossible to even burn. So, yeah, I don't, it's, to me, it's one of those things that I think it's just a little extra step for people to do and mess with. I don't know. That's just my 2 cents on it. We're not making any decisions, right? We're just discussing it, so. Yeah, I don't see an issue with removing the permit and moving it back to a 10-foot clearance. Just based on state standard, and then, hey, if it's good enough for Sutter Creek.
No vote. I agree mostly with both Wendy and Don. I think it is good to have education, like I said, a piece of paper. And if you can get it put online where they can, get the application or fill it out and get the information to, probably burn. Again, 10 feet has been the standard forever, like I said, statewide, so that's not an issue for me. The 20 feet, that was a little excessive, but it was what it was. So here we are, and let's fix it. Let's make it easy, like she says, we don't need to continuously have stomach blocks, but we also want education because look what's happened down in Southern California.
Sure.
And we gotta make sure that people are doing it right so that they're not just haphazardly building a bonfire.
Throwing a bunch of gasoline.
Yeah, throwing gasoline on it.
On that regard, as far as education goes, do we have any links on our website that link to CAL FIRE standards for, on our city website, excuse me? Okay, so maybe we could initiate something like that where we're adding maybe a burn, burn recommendations. I know for my husband, he always makes the phone call first to the burn phone hotline. If it's a burn day, it's a burn day. It's not a burn day, it's not a burn day.
Right.
That's it. So, there's that. So maybe we could provide that phone number as well.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that, if the council decides to direct, the city manager to reduce it to 10 feet and to remove the burn permit, you still have a fully enforceable ordinance. So in other words, it's not regulation, you're just,
Right.
and you can still on your website say, these are the regulations, if you don't, it's
Right.
enforceable, it's a violation, that kind of thing.
Well, we also have a problem now with people burning trash. I think that education needs to go out there because we all smell the plastic.
Yeah, so the city attorney just said basically exactly what I was gonna say next, is that, and another thing I'll bring up, so Amador Fire does have on their website a tab for burn pile. And it has a lot of good information, you click on, and it actually gives you the number for the air district, tells you need to call in. And they have the number also for, CAL FIRE AEU on there. And like the attorney's saying, our city attorney's saying, by not having a permit, it doesn't, you still have all the regulation, and we put out the, we were putting out the newsletter. I don't know why, when we have Plymouth Colony and stuff, or on the city's, page, we can't just have, like, these are all the burn requirements, these are the ordinances, and just tell people if you're gonna burn, you better check, or you might be subject, of committing a violation without having to do. The biggest thing to me, the permit thing, is it doesn't seem like we really have anything really good in place right now. where some of the places that are requiring it, it's free, you can go on 24/7, click on, do it, have it. But right now, it's almost February, we have nothing. So I would like that. Everybody else idea, I'd rather just not even have
I
it,
think we're all kind of,
yeah.
right, still need to.
Yep.
Yeah. So, hold on. I want to enter Michael Mara's public comment on this into the record. Now, Michael.
Alex, you, I swear I forgot what I was gonna say there.
Burning piles. Burning desires.
Well, you know, I forgot, so I'll just say,
Sorry,
using
didn't mess you up.
get a solo stove, they burn really efficiently, no smoke, there you go.
Snoop Dogg says it.
Yeah.
Good plug, right? Yes. Anyone else?
I thank you for all your work, Don.
Thank you.
Anything from, okay. So I guess close public comment, and I think you got direction.
So I just want to confirm, you want an ordinance brought back to remove the permit and to remove.
To bring it back to 10 feet.
Yeah, bring it back to 10 feet.
Okay.
And do we need to adding information to the website?
Yeah, put it in the educational.
Yes,
Yeah.
Piece of it to the website.
yeah, education piece. Yeah. Council staff and communications. Brief reports on matters of general interest. City manager's report.
The only thing I have tonight is that the open house for the fire station improvement project will be on January 30th at 10 a.m. If you could put it on your calendars, please.
10 a.m. Fire open.
What January 30th?
January 30th at 10 a.m.
And I want to thank you, Margaret, for the email with your breakdown of all that email you sent, all the breakdown of everything that you're doing. That was really nice to have all that information.
Yeah.
Go through. Thank you. Mayor and council members reports. Wendy. Anything?
I don't have any reports.
Okay. Forward. Nothing here. Wow. So, we go to April 3, council request for future agenda items.
Are we gonna be talking about committees and joining them and what is that all about?
That's good.
February 13th, it'll be on the agenda.
Thank you.
If you could get your sheets to Victoria 10 days prior to that, that would be great.
All right, I'll chat with her. Thank you.
I have a request, I don't even know if this has to be an agenda item, so Frank, maybe you can. But I know one of the things that I've heard from different citizens and even for myself is reporting by committees, by ad hoc committees to the city council on a regular standard basis. And what I'd like to see is for there to be some sort of policy in place that is a requirement. If there's an ad hoc committee that is actively working on something that's happening in the city, that that committee, there be some sort of report from that committee as to what's happening.
I believe that's in a policy, I'll have to take a look.
Okay, we currently have a policy covering that, you'll just have to see.
I believe it's in one of the policies, I'll have to take a look,
Okay,
and I'll get back to you.
okay, that'd be great.
Yeah, if it needs to be agendized, we'll agendize.
Perfect. There's, I don't know if it needs to be agenda, there's a few things I've had questions on that the city council worked on in the past after back up. And a couple things that I don't know if we can talk about in the future is where we're at with Caltrans building this walking path or the work that they were gonna do, it's been talked about, I haven't really heard anything recently about that. I'd like to know, you know, the path we're supposed to be getting from Tiffindale down towards town.
I think Doug had a report on that before he left his space. So that was probably in late November.
Yeah, I was early when I had, oh, when they were gonna necessarily start doing it.
I don't remember.
Well, that is one of the committees that is open for joining.
Right.
Yeah. Is that right?
That's it,
The construction bid for most of that project has been awarded to a construction company. But the part from Zinfandel Ridge to Bush Street was excluded from the project due to the cost of the environmental.
Yeah, I do remember that being discussed. I just, after that, hadn't heard, when are they starting on it, or if there's been any updates, or is there any update to it, or?
I haven't heard recently, I can reach out to Caltrans.
We know what the added cost was. If you could find out.
I will ask.
Awesome.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you all for coming, and we're gonna go into closed session. So thank you again for being here, and be a part of the process.
You won't have your mic.
Okay. Reporting out of closed session, no reportable actions, and I adjourn the meeting at 9:04.